Okay, thank you very much for joining. And we start a new book of the Torah this week, which is the third book of Vayikra. But we're going to use the few minutes we have tonight to discuss, to go back to Pesach and preparing for the celebration, reading the Haggadah and being inspired on Pesach when we sit down on Saturday night in a week and a half to begin our Seder. So I wanted to use the Haggadah as the background text here. I wanted to just really present one overarching idea, try to show it to you from the text, and we'll call it a night, and we'll hopefully go back to work in the enslavement of preparing for Pesach so that we can celebrate being free. I had a friend many years ago who mentioned to me that he thinks there's a lot of women, Jewish women in the world who wish we weren't freed from Egypt. Things may have been easier for them. But in any event, let's start off with the goal statement so that we can have in mind from the beginning, what is our aim when we sit down to celebrate Pesach on the first night and to go through the Haggadah and eat the matzah and the moror and drink the 4 cups of wine and tell the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim, of the Jewish people going out of Egypt. So let's make this clear. The goal statement is for us to see ourselves personally as though we had gone out of Egypt. Chayav adam lirot et atzmo ki hu yotza mimitzrayim. As if we personally experienced what's in the Haggadah, and as if we were redeemed. And hence the title for tonight's class, taken from the Haggadah itself, is when it says, Kol yemei chayecha, all the days of your life, you will remember going out of Egypt. And we were taught from Ben Zoma, Yemei chayecha hayamim. We should remember all the days of our life. Kol yemei chayecha haleilos. All the days of our life. It doesn't say yemei chayecha, but it says all the days, and it comes to include the nighttime. What does that mean? So the nighttime means, in the simplest of terms, and we use this in the evening prayers, the nighttime is a time when things are dark for the Jewish people, and therefore our reserves of trust and faith and belief are called upon when it's dark outside. So really, if we look at it in this light, we see the following thing. We see that we're out to see ourselves with all the exhilaration and excitement as if we ourselves have just gone out of Egypt. And we're required, or we're aiming to see that even if we find ourselves at a moment of darkness when this experience seems very removed from us. And we can all imagine things, if you read very moving Holocaust reminders, you will see how people celebrated Pesach in Auschwitz. And something that certainly is a tremendous test of faith. So what we see from this is this idea of seeing ourselves as if we just went out of Egypt. We all think to ourselves the following. Of course, I would see if I was on top of the world, if I was experiencing a great high of feeling as though God had just lifted me up and done something miraculous for me. Of course, at that moment, I can taste the experience of going out of Egypt. But how do you expect me to feel that way when there are dark clouds on the horizon, or when times are really dark? Or even at times when I just feel things are okay. So how much do I really have to be celebrating? So I wanted to address this question and the insight of Ben Zoma by looking at the arc of the narrative in the Haggadah for a couple of minutes. making a few points from it, and then coming to a conclusion. But I want to frame this as follows. There are three basic notions about the world having a creator that are stacked one on top of the other. The first thing is that the world had a creator, which means that once upon a time, the world was created. Okay, that notion itself is not as simple as you think, because the great philosopher Aristotle, in wanting to avoid acknowledging a God, came up with the theory that the world always existed. So there's no creator because there's no beginning. That we have problems with thinking about there being no beginning philosophically, but that's what he held. So the first level is, yes, there was a creator. The second level is the creator aware of what's going on in the world? Does the creator care? Because after all, if you told me that I built a model airplane when I was a child and I left it on the counter where I used to live, and today it still exists someplace, I'm not related or connected to that whatsoever. But the second level is that there's a creator who's completely aware and focused even on everything that's taking place. And then the third level is not only is there a creator, and does that creator have an awareness and a focus on the world and what's going on in the world, something that bad times tend to make us question, but that creator is also intimately and actively involved in what's taking place. So I want to first state that if we're going to fulfill this notion of seeing ourselves as if we ourselves are walking out of Egypt and that we've been redeemed by Hashem, and all the power and uplift and excitement and feelings of joy that naturally would bring to a person, that the creator of everything has interceded in the world on my behalf and has given me, handed me on a silver platter a tremendous opportunity, that's very exciting. But we have to come to that conclusion, even if things don't seem, even if we don't have that high going for us. And I want to see how we could get there. So I want to go through the narrative, the steps in the Haggadah on an overview basis, right from where we start telling the story. And where I'm going to start from in this is right after the Manishtana. Okay? The Manishtana is certainly an important, beautiful part of the Haggadah. And what the Manishtana is meant to point out is that there are contradictions in what's taking place. We're celebrating freedom. We're eating things that are bitter. We're eating matzah, which sort of reminds us of being free. It sort of also reminds us of being enslaved. There's a certain clarity that escapes us at the beginning of the Seder, and we're out to achieve that clarity. But we're framing it from the sense that let's achieve clarity, that why we should feel such tremendous joy in spite of the circumstances we're in. So let's begin with where we start answering this question. Avadim hayinu leFaro b'Mitzrayim, that we, the Jewish people, were enslaved to Pharaoh. Vayotzieni Hashem Elokeinu misham biyad chazaka v'yizro netuya, and God took us out of there with a strong hand and an outstretched arm. So the notion that's connected there is we were slaves in Egypt. Well, wouldn't it be more likely to say our forefathers were slaves, our ancestors were slaves in Egypt? So the first thing we need to understand is that when Pharaoh initially started up with the Jewish people and step by step enslaved us in Egypt, his goal was to enslave the Jewish people throughout history. He had a tremendous scope and vision. Why? Because something about the Jewish people threatened him. And those are the words that Pharaoh uses in Egypt, that perhaps an enemy will come and he will side with our enemy. Sounds fanciful. But you find the same language used about Abraham in the tradition, the Midrashic tradition, that Abraham was thrown into the burning furnace in Ur Kasdim. What's the notion there? And we see it in the world today, and I will tell you specifically, you see it in many places in the world today, but one specific way we see it is in what's going on in Hong Kong today with China. China is this vast country, a couple billion people, tremendous wealth, tremendous power, rivaling the United States in every way. Hong Kong is just one city. And for the last 20 years, there's been an understanding that Hong Kong can be this little enclave of freedom. And that was the deal that they made with England when they took control of it. But the vast Chinese Communist Party feels threatened to its core politically by a small group of people speaking out the notion of freedom in this city of Hong Kong. And I want to just use that as an analogy for how the world sees the Jewish people and really the manner in which anti-Semitism is always framed, so that we can understand that when Pharaoh decided that the Jewish people are bothering me, they're growing, they're becoming an influence in my country, they need to be crushed and enslaved. Paro's aim was, we need to take care of the Jews now and forever. And what I mean by forever, we need to see to it that the Jewish people are not free to be an example of what it means to be God's people in the world forever again in history. And that's really the goal of every nation and every person who stands up in opposition to the Jewish people. We can use more historical references to bear this out, but I think that's what we need to begin the story of the Haggadah. Avadim hayinu, we, you and I, were enslaved to Paro. Meaning what? Paro had a goal in mind to prevent us from sitting down at a Pesach Seder, reliving the redemption from Egypt, and therefore seeing ourselves as God's ambassador to the world with the purpose of teaching the world what it means to live in this world as Hashem's child, recognizing Hashem as the creator, as having an interest in the world, and being intimately involved in everything that happens in the world, all the ups and all the downs and everything that's taking place in the world. And God is never, ever turning his attention elsewhere. So even though we talk in Jewish literature, like when we did about Purim, about Hastaras Panim, so we talk about Hashem covering his face a little bit, not losing sight of what's taking place in the world, but making it appear as though God is less active and less interested. And God has a purpose in doing that. But that purpose, which we'll discuss at a certain point tonight, that purpose does not mean losing interest. God's not bored with us. He's not disinterested in the world. An interesting reference I would just make is the following, that according to the Ibn Ezra, we translate Pesach as Passover. And that's the way Rashi translates Pasachti al batechem, that God passed over, jumped over, skipped over. Those are the kind of words that Rashi uses. The Ibn Ezra, who has his own grammatical framework, claims that the word Pesach means to hover over. And the image I have is a mother hovering over a newborn child. They don't get bored or distracted. That's why when a baby cries in the middle of the night, it's the baby's mother who hears the cry, because there's a certain sense of attachment and connection and involvement that is really unbreakable. Even the normal patterns of sleep don't break it. So this is what we're going to aim for. And you can almost see as though celebrating Pesach in the dark times, as those Jews did in Auschwitz who had the courage to do that, they're really standing up for the notion that the world has a creator who is always aware of what transpires. And not only is the creator always aware, but the creator is always, always involved in what's going on. See, and this is a sense that's summarized by some writers as saying, memory is a gift. Now, memory can be a big burden also. You know, I remember all the problems, mistakes. I remember the Holocaust. It seems to weigh me down. But memory can be a gift when a person is able to understand that memory in the context of ultimately an attachment to God playing itself out even through the worst of times, just as it plays itself out through the best of times. So we continue in the Haggadah. Vayotzieni Hashem Elokeinu, Vayotzienu Hashem Elokeinu Misham, V'yad Chazakah V'zroa Netuyah. And here we define this later on is that God directly took us out of Egypt, the opposite of what Purim represented, the sense that God openly interceded into the world in a way that no one could deny. Pharaoh himself, the perpetrator of the evil against the Jewish people, couldn't deny it, even though he resisted it, even though he fought against it, even though ultimately he perhaps never capitulated to it because he had an undying interest in suppressing what the Jewish people represent in the world. And that's why he's an evil person. And that's the essence of evil on all levels, is to suppress the awareness of there being a creator who's intimately involved in the world at all times. Why? Because forces and people that want to perpetrate evil or that want to live lives purely based on their own appetites or aggrandizement and having no interest in doing what's right, such people can't tolerate there being a people like the Jewish people in the world. And again, just in the political sphere, the entire country of China, with all of its power and might, can't tolerate a few dissenters roaming through the streets of Hong Kong with signs saying we want to be free. It's the same idea. Not that life is all or nothing, but that it infringes, as anti-Semites have said, it infringes on our freedom to do what ultimately we think we want to do, which is to live a life of aggrandizement. The Jewish people infringe on that, they curtail that, and therefore they have to be suppressed. And that's why Paro wanted to suppress us even today. And that's why we have to go back to the source and say Hashem miraculously elevated us and placed us on this pedestal and gave us this position in the world. And lo and behold, in spite of the best efforts of the pharaohs of history, we're still here. And that proves beyond a shadow of a shadow of doubt that Hashem is intimately involved in the world. Then we say something. If the Ilul Hotzia Kodesh Baruch Hu Esavosenim in Mitzrayim, had God directly not taken our forefathers out of Egypt, we and our children and our children's children would be enslaved to Pharaoh in Egypt. Again, that's this idea of continuing through history. If we weren't miraculously rescued in a manner that once and for all showed us how deeply committed God is to having a Jewish people in the world and having this voice of creator who's involved, who cares, and is associated with each one of us and with all of us as a people, then if that didn't take place then, we wouldn't have it today. Because it took place then, we have it today, almost no matter what. And then we go on. And we start talking about the Seder that took place at the time of Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Tarfon, who were in Bnei Brak at a very dark time in Jewish history when the Jewish world was just beginning to understand that we were at a period of time where we don't have a Beit HaMikdash, where we don't have a temple in our midst, where we don't have a physical place that we could point to and say, this is God's home amongst the Jewish people. And they talked about going out of Egypt. And they talked about it intensively. And then we come to the statement of Rebbe Elazar ben Azariah, who said, thanks to Ben Zoma, we know Kol Yemei Chayecha, all the days of our life, includes the nighttime. So even though we, these particular rabbis, were sitting at a very dark moment of Jewish history where there was still the smell of smoke coming from Jerusalem, where the city had been leveled, where the temple was now a place where foxes roamed and people planted and plowed. In spite of all that, this story is relevant to us because we still are, and we're going to have the opportunity to voice this understanding of reality, that there is a creator, that the creator is aware, and that the creator is intimately involved in my life, in your life, and in the ongoing enterprise of the Jewish people being a people that could speak this notion that there's ultimate moral freedom possible in the world, and it's something people should strive for. And then we say significantly, Baruch HaMokom Baruch Hu, blessed is Hashem. Why? Shenosan Torah le'amo Yisrael Baruch Hu, because God gave us the Torah. Where does this fit in here? We're not talking about Shavuos. We're talking about Pesach, because Torah and the study of Torah and the upholding of Torah and the fulfillment of Torah, this is the medium which enables us to achieve continuity. So nerds, once we agree that this is what we stand for, so we could have a discussion right now tonight on this talk. Rabbi, what guarantee is, okay, we've made it for 2,000 years of exile. And yes, we have a lot more going for us now. We have the land of Israel. We have so much that really smell like redemption is in the air, but we're not redeemed. There's dark clouds on the horizon. Things are not the way you and I would orchestrate them or expect a loving God to make them at this moment. They're not perfect, as people always point out nowadays. So the answer to that is Baruch Shenosan Torah le'amo Yisrael. We have a Torah. And we know, and we continue to know, that Torah sustains the Jewish people. Torah, absolutely, the connection to Torah, the study of Torah, and the opportunity, the time we're taking to study the Haggadah, so that when we sit down on Saturday night, a week and a half from now, and we want to convey to our children and to ourselves and to generations to come, that we have much to celebrate now, as if we ourselves are experiencing these miracles, and as if these miracles are taking place right now. And then I want to move on. There's 4 sons. I think we discussed the Chocham a little bit, but I wanted to move on to the 4th of the sons that come next. And the 4 sons are to explain how the Torah is meant to address us, no matter how we're feeling today, whether we're feeling wise and inquisitive and wanting to know all the details, whether we're feeling alienated like the Russia and what's this for you but not for me, whether we're feeling emotionally dead like the Tom, what is this, have a basic issue, or even if we're the She'eno Yudea Lishol, where we're just watching life go by, and we seemingly are not engaged actively in even living our own lives. We've just reached this shell within ourselves, and okay, great, there'll be a good meal at the end. I don't mind sitting through a couple of hours of reading and hearing people discuss, and I'm happy to be here at your Seder, but I don't have any questions because this happened a long time ago. So what do we answer him? We answer him, because of this, God took us out of Egypt. What's the this? In the end, we point out, because of the matzah and the moror that is sitting right in front of us. Because we're here tonight, and that's why the Haggadah and the first night of Pesach is a unique moment of the year. We're not here to remember what used to happen. We're here to recreate within ourselves the conviction, the very attitude that the Jewish people had at the moment when God said, leave Egypt. And I'll just point out, that's what the matzah symbolizes. Because I'll tell you what, there's an insight here that we have to reconcile with. Yes, matzah was the bread of affliction that the taskmasters insisted we eat because it was cheap to produce and it satisfied us for a long time, even though it's not the most pleasant food to eat. But matzah also is what we ate when we were sent out of Egypt. And you know why? Because basically Hashem said, okay, let's go, freedom time. We said, okay, God, give us another half hour. We're baking our bread. We got stuff to do. God said, nope, that's not the way life works. Life works on a schedule and on a time frame that's directed by God. That God, as a creator and as an interested party in the world, is also the orchestrator of every single moment of history that's taking place. And as such, I'm telling you, this is the moment you leave. What about our bread? Okay, so you're going to have to bake it as matzah in the state it is right now and take it with you. Okay, but God, that's the same thing we've been eating for a couple hundred years as slaves. Okay, but that's what you're going to taste and that's what you're going to live on, because after all, it's all under the providence of Hashem. And that's what matzah represents here too. But when we tell the she'enu yodei lisha, when we tell the son who is too preoccupied with things to even bother to engage us in conversation at the Seder and just happy to sit, listen, smile, and wait for the chicken soup to come, we engage that and say, no, we're telling the story now in an experiential way because it's an experience that's relevant to us right now. Because when we finish this Seder, we're going to feel tremendous elation that God has uplifted us and that God is with us. And just to pull this together, I want to quote a statement from the Talmud. There was one of the rabbis of the Talmud was named Rabbi Alexandre. And this is what he used to say at the end of every prayer when he finished the Amidah. Master of the universe, it is open and revealed to you that our true desire is to fulfill your desire, to be your people, to live up to every aspect of the Torah that you gave us after we left Egypt and every understanding of your involvement in the world that we saw when we were leaving Egypt. So what stops us? And he answers, the leaven in the dough, the chametz, and the nation which we are currently subjected to. Please save us from these influences so we may fulfill your desire as you wish us to do. And this was 365 days a year, every time he finished praying. He called his attention to the following moment. I've just finished offering prayers to God. Sometimes times are great. Sometimes times are difficult. Sometimes people are sick and I'm praying for them to get better. At other times, I'm just filled with gratitude and joy and thanksgiving. And I want to express to God how much I recognize I owe to you, God, for sustaining me in the world. A lot of different times happen. Through thick and thin, within my own inner nature, is a certain resistance to acknowledging God. Not like Pharaoh, not in opposition to it, but I have resistance. What does that resistance come from? The dough is puffed up. There's chametz. What does chametz represent? Things aren't the way I want them to be. You know, I have an ego. I have a viewpoint. And, you know, God, I can't feel joy at this moment. And therefore, I can't, in happiness, recognize you, God, because things aren't the way I want them to be. And that's the chametz or shebe'isa. That's the leaven that's in the dough. That's the sense that, God, you have to run the world according to my standards, rather than me recognizing you as the ongoing orchestrator of the world, running the world according to your standards and your wisdom and your direction. And then there's the societal influence. Then there's the pharaohs of the world telling us, you know, there's a political order here. We embrace a certain way of life, idolatry, remote from us, but certainly placing material fulfillment as number one, recognizing that power and glory really rock each one of us and therefore should be pursued. And even the notion that it's hard to have Jewish people living amongst us because they seem to rain on our parade when we want to be unbridled and feel that there's no one but me in the world that I have to worry about. So what does Rev. Alexandri say? After he finishes praying to God every single day, he says, inside of me is that child of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, of Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah, who has a yearning to live in this world as Hashem's ambassador and God's representative to the world. That's here within me. I don't feel it so keenly right now for internal and external reasons. They're really all internal, but in other words, internal reasons that are provoked just by my own personal nature, or that are provoked by the society that's around me. They're both hampering me. I would even go so far as to say they're enslaving me. They're keeping me from feeling the way a Jewish person really should feel. But Hashem, I want to tap into what's deep inside of me, which is a pure desire to fulfill the way you want us to live in the world. So please release us, save us from their hands so that we can fulfill all that you want from us with a full heart. These words need to frame our Seder, and they rely upon so many ideas of coming to grips with the fact that God is all powerful, so that if things aren't the way I want them to be right now, it's not because God lacks the means to make them that way, but rather God's wisdom is that it shouldn't be that way. And I want to take it a step further. Something else that we need to understand as we sit down for the Pesach Hagaddah. All the efforts to destroy the Jewish people and to wipe us out have only in the end given us deeper resolve and made us stronger. This is what drove Paro crazy in Egypt, where Paro himself says, the more we oppress them, and it's in the Haggadah, the more they flourish. We set out on a program to kill the firstborn, and now there are more Jews than there were before. Just imagine the feelings of even, look at anything. Look at the history of the Arab world's opposition to the Jewish people. Okay, we don't want these Jews returning to their homeland and taking away our territory. And here it is, a short 73 years after the founding of the state of Israel. And all of a sudden, Israel represents to them such achievement and accomplishment in their own terms. So you see, the more we've been opposed, we're opposed by people that admire military might. So lo and behold, Israel becomes the most powerful nation in the region. We are opposed by nations that only want wealth and aggrandizement. And all of a sudden, Israel has the highest GDP and the greatest, not the greatest accumulation of wealth, because you have oil-producing nations there that have almost unlimited wealth per capita, but in a sense, the most productive country, the most creative country, the country that produces as much intellectual capital for the world as does Europe, as does almost all other nations of the world, even though it's a percent or two of their size. So we're going to sit down at the Pesach Seder, please God, a week from Saturday night, and we're going to have this mindset. I want to go through the process of this Haggadah, and I want to emerge with the feeling, with the taste in my mouth, as we tell the wise son. Okay, after you eat the afikomen, we don't eat anything because we want the taste to linger. I want to finish the Seder with the taste of redemption in my mouth. Okay. In order to do that, I have to really put myself into the story. And I have to be able to put myself into the story, even though it's not so easy for me to envision that something so miraculous and profound is taking place right now in my life as took place then 3,300 years ago. But it is, because Hashem is just as involved. He's just as intimately working with us. He's just as directly taking all the energy of our enemies, and instead of allowing it to disable us and ruin us, it instead provokes greater strength, greater conviction, and greater opportunity to fulfill everything that Hashem wants in the world. And this is the manner in which God is involved in the world. So let's get with the program. Let's put ourselves into the story. Let's understand that the edicts of Pharaoh then were meant to apply to us today. And as we say even earlier in the Haggadah, right now we're still enslaved. We're still victimized by those attitudes. Of course, mostly from what comes from within ourselves, but also what's brought to us from the outside. And we're here to escape from all that. We're here to dig deeply within the purity within ourselves so that we recognize ultimately there's a creator who never, ever takes his eyes off of us. As the Torah says, the land of Israel is always the apple of his eye, even though centuries can go by when it just seems like the dust is just blowing in from the desert and there's no real sign of life. But we see that life renew itself, and that this creator is hovering over us. In the words of the Ibn Ezra, he's involved with us, and he's looking for us to find within ourselves this desire to live our lives as God's ambassador to the world. We're not a product of history. We are the purpose of history. And that's what we're going to achieve when we sit down with the Haggadah, place ourselves within the story, go through all the ups and downs. We talk about how difficult the life was, how much strain the Jewish people were under, and how miraculously we were raised up. We're going to eat matzah, which has an ambivalence to it. We're going to eat moror, which is bitter to us. We're also going to eat an afikomen, which is to remind us of the Paschal Lamb and leave a taste in our mouth of what it really means to be redeemed by Hashem, and then take that energy with us so that we're less slaves and more free going forward for the rest of the year. And please God, each of us should have such a Seder and should experience such an experience when we get up from our Seder in 10 days. Thank you very much. I'm happy to answer any questions if anybody would like me to.